a lot of media, whether it be anime, movies, or any TV show, they normally struggle and suck when it comes to actually writing horror. There's definitely, some good horror stuff that's definitely out there. I mean, like, I do know, I have played a few good horror games, like Doki Doki Literature Club and Resident Evil 4. Um, and I do think that there are more good, stuff out there that are good horror games in that. But, I mean, at the very least, definitely from recent memory, nothing actually stuck with me that long being a good horror show or a good horror movie, because I haven't really seen, no offense, I haven't really seen a lot of really good horror shows or horror movies, to be honest with you, that I actually think are good. And my point with that is that I think a lot of media struggles actually being scary. I remember seeing Perfect Blue though, which was actually a great anime film in my opinion, but I've seen it a long time ago. Um, Moving on, enter Tokyo Ghoul. Instead of being even slightly scary or even slightly intimidating on any level, Tokyo Ghoul actually manages to baffle me with the fact that it's so edgy and over the top that it tries to literally sell itself as horror when in reality it's just comedic and laughable because of how ridiculous the show becomes. Tokyo Ghoul is literal dog shit. And the biggest problem with the entire first season of this atrocious anime actually stems from the fact that there are way too many characters and the show just squeezes arcs together, and the entire show just feels cluttered with no air to breathe with anything it shows to actually develop its casts of characters. Today, I'm going to just review season 1 of the show, so this review won't be covering Tokyo Ghoul Route A, which is the second season, and Tokyo Ghoul Re, which is the third season. I'm actually surprised a show this terrible even got sequels to begin with, but lo and behold. I also won't be comparing this to the manga since I haven't read anything, so I can't say anything about that counterpart, but I will definitely be discussing the anime in entire full detail and grilling apart every small part of this colossal shit show. I've heard a lot about Tokyo Ghoul, and I remember even when I was in high school that they had the manga in the library, but I didn't actually know what it was really about. I remember like seeing discussions about it on the internet, and some people hated the show, and some people I knew actually liked it. So, I mean, the thing with that, and the thing with that is that you really shouldn't go into something just with someone else's opinion. Make sure you always have your own opinion, and make sure that you go into something blind as you possibly can. Anyways, Tokyo Ghoul looked a little bit interesting to me, so I figured with a bit of free time I would just watch the entire first season, and let's just say it actually blew my mind how bad this show actually was. This isn't going to be a video as special as ripping apart the Evangelion rebuilds, but I found this topic interesting enough that it definitely deserves discussion, at least. So with that place, let's get on to the review. I should also mention the fact that, yes, I actually have recently watched Tokyo Ghoul. I finished the entire first season. It was 12 episodes long. And that's why I'm also reviewing this today as well, of course. I mean, obviously, I've watched it. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a review. Tokyo Ghoul is about a boy named Ken Kaneki who's given these strange powers, becoming a ghoul after encountering another ghoul named Rize, who was a girl dating him one time, but then wanted to literally just eat his ass, and then a bunch of things just happen afterwards. I'm sorry if that summary description of the plot feels disjointed, but believe me, after you're done watching this travesty, this is actually the most coherent description of the entire story that you can tell someone what the show is about. The show feels like 4 or 5 different things happening and then mangled together, not feeling coherent because the direction with the story is terrible and often feels confusing because the show never focuses on one straight thing and crams so many different parts of the show that just happen all in only 12 episodes. Yes, you heard me. The entire first season is literally only 12 episodes and expects you to just give a shit about each character and every little thing happening. So how does the show start exactly? Well, here's honestly where we begin, and I'm actually not even making this up. We're shown 2 characters in the first scene of the entire anime having a meaningless discussion with no context around what's going on, and the girl just decides to eat a person just in front of her. 2 seconds into this shit heap, and the show literally goes full Akame ga kill mode and doesn't hide literally anything from just being as edgy as you could possibly get. Now, one of the biggest problems you'll notice in the entire show is that the show never actually explains what a ghoul is, even let alone the fact that this show is just shallow, how it actually tries to show real horror. Having someone just getting eaten by another person just getting eaten. So having someone just eating another person for no reason is not automatically scary, and there needs to at least be context understanding what a ghoul is and what exactly makes a ghoul and why they exist to begin with, to even show why this would be horrifying to even begin with. Yeah, let's just eat people, right? We don't actually know what these things are, and the show just expects you to just go with it. Just go with what pig slop it gives you. Let me ask you this. Why do ghouls only eat people, and why does this mean anything? What purpose does this actually serve in the story, really? To me, it just feels shallow, especially when you start seeing that nearly every character in this garbage show has these same quirks about them, whether they're one of the good guys or bad guys. Moving past that odd scene, let's actually talk about the rest of the first episode. We're then introduced to our main character, Ken Kaneki, and his best friend, Hide, or Hide, or however you want to pronounce it. They're in a cafe together, and there's a weird scene where Hyde just intimidates a cute girl for the fact that she's just cute, and who we later in the same episode find out is Rize. He makes a comment on just how cute she is, and after Ken Kaneki is the one who actually goes out with this bitch. After a date they go on, Rize reveals herself actually that she's a ghoul, and she attacks Ken and tries eating him. One major problem with this entire scenario is the fact that since Hyde is his considered best friend, I find it especially odd and jarred me the most in the final episode where Hide was never really there much in the show after this point to begin with, but yet the show expects you to really give a shit about him, that he was Ken's best friend. I also think there's a massive problem coming from Rize as a character, since especially from the fact that she actually dies in the same episode she was revealed to be a villain, and only reappears the next episode and during the last episode as a ghost, but more on that later. A bunch of rocks out of nowhere just fall on her, and she just dies. At least even in a terrible show like High School DxD, it took 5 episodes before Rainier was killed off, and she at least accomplished more as a villain than Rize, who literally just dies in a single episode. My biggest problem with Rize is that she actually feels more like a plot device for powering up the main character, and just serves as a tool for exposition, rather than actually feeling like a character, and gives pseudo-intellectual bullshit that isn't really developed and thought together well presented by the character's actions in the storyline. She just feels like a Deus Ex Machina trope. Literally just like, in the beginning of the show, she just dies, like literally like a few minutes after she's revealed to be a villain. And later on in the show, she's just back for no reason really. And it's not even explained. Like it just kind of confuses you and you're like what the hell is this dumb shit? Rize doesn't actually feel like she's written like an actual character. Her role in the show just feels all over the place, and it's just put in different spots feeling like Deus Ex Machina just made to progress the plot. We'll touch more on that, though, when we talk about the final episode and how it fails to connect everything before it to feel like it actually makes sense, because most of what happens before the final episode all just feels like 10 different stories with different characters, all disjointed and have no focus, because there simply isn't enough time to flesh each character out when your first season is only 12 episodes. It just feels like poor management, and the pacing of everything is literally so fast that the show just becomes a huge mess because it doesn't take its time to actually focus. Without enough time to flesh out each character, it just feels jumbled and mangled with other nonsense happening because there's no coherent storytelling. Believe it or not, there's actually more issues just in the first episode and stem from there also. You gotta like how literally nothing is explained after Rize attacks Kaneki. This moment from here on out is actually what turns him into a ghoul. Or at least I think so, because the show doesn't actually show anything well enough to its audience, how its own world works with people having powers and what ghouls actually are, so we can grab enough information and details about them to actually understand them. After suffering an injury made by Rize, Ken reappears in the hospital where we're literally just thrown another random character just taking care of him, I guess. After a little time where my attention span on what the hell was happening was running out because this show was putting me to sleep, the episode ends. The first episode of Tokyo Ghoul fails to give any strong first impression, mainly because it just tries to throw as much at you as possible, with no context and doing it all in the least subtle way possible. I've dealt with for terrible first episodes of anime a lot before, and Tokyo Ghoul is no exception, and I see many flaws stemming from the fact that you already have at least like 5 different characters just thrown in one episode to deal with, and one of the biggest characters in the show is already just dead in one episode. One trope I get really frustrated with, and one thing that gets very cliche and annoying, is the trope where a character dies in just the first episode, and you're just expected to care and think about it regardless if it's a member of the supporting cast or anyone. The reason why I also bring this up is because this trope really becomes a problem when you realize there's a massive plot hole in the final episode. The episode is also weak because beyond also the fact that it does a weak job of being a horror anime with just being edgy, its main character Ken Kaneki is also weakly introduced, as he isn't shown to really have much purpose of what he's trying to accomplish, and things only feel like they just happen around him or to him, but he has no arc being controlled and falls off the rails, because as you really see this going forward, as you scoop each amount of puke and eat it, finishing each episode. And moving past the first episode, that's where we get to our next problems. The main character is just a blank slate and has nothing to him as a character. Ken often feels pushed aside, so his character development literally gets no focus. He doesn't get development. Just saying. He has no memorable moments as a character, and the only things he does is just pull shit out of his ass to win each fight, cries and screams a bunch of times, and feels like he does nothing. And sometimes he doesn't even win fights. He just watches other people fight beside him. Hell, I actually thought it was weird when a villain named Shu killed one of his own servants when a fight was just happening in episode 4, where a fat thing was just trying to kill Ken, and a bunch of weird people were just watching it all happen. I think it was episode 4, maybe like at least definitely around there. I'm not sure. I mean, the show's so incoherent that it makes you kind of like, I don't know. This is what I mean when I say a bunch of shit just happens and you're just supposed to go along with it. This moment has no context with anything happening, and you just see it because the show is squeezing bullshit together, making a convoluted storyline. Ken doesn't do anything in this episode except the fact that he just punches the thing in his mouth, and we don't even see a hilariously bad moment where he just kills it, which alone could have just made the show at least entertaining with how stupid and bad it is. My point with Ken is actually that he doesn't really do anything. It feels like nothing is a character. I mean, what could you honestly tell me that's interesting or really even anything about him? He just feels like he's just forced being the main character, and he doesn't even have a goal. So there's nothing for us to be able to be able to projecting ourselves to see how he grows as a person, and just seeing that he's actually a character instead of someone who's blank with nothing to him. Even some of the worst main characters ever written at least have goals, even if it's poorly designed from point A to point B. The fact Tokyo Ghoul creates such a mess because it can't even at least put a little more effort in at least giving him something to accomplish is ridiculous. All stories have at least something navigating from point A to point B. But without either basic part, nothing has an arc, and therefore each character becomes just a living piece of cardboard just existing, so they aren't compelling and there's nothing to care about them for. The biggest problem with Ken Kaneki as a protagonist is that he has no focus just on who he is as a character. He doesn't interact with much with the other characters in the show, and because he has no goals, he doesn't develop or change or grow as a person and even learn anything. How does a story articulate without character growth and knowledge? You need learning in order to explore so we as the audience can understand the world the show is trying to suck us into. Ken is not an interesting character. He's just a blank edgelord protagonist with no personality and just serves the plot being a tool for other things happening, and the show is boring because of it. I've already talked a little bit before about how the show fails with utilizing horror aspects because the show is so over the top and ridiculous showing horror, and it's more funny and comical than anything even remotely scary. Well, another thing that makes this fail tremendously at even being remotely scary is how often you'll see villains in the show where they have these over-exaggerated, evil-looking faces that look so stupid that they look more like guys that are taking a massive shit in their pants rather than even being remotely threatening. One thing that I think is bad in most anime, like in Akame ga Kill for another example, is when shows go an extra mile just to show an evil villain who is literally just some evil dickbag by showing their faces with insane grins just for the sake that they're really trying to retardedly tell you as much as possible that they're just evil dickbags. I mean, just look at Mr. Mato's face and look at how open his one eyeball looks. Like he's about to have a sight seizure, and look at his weird smile where his mouth just looks like an insanely, upward C shape. I mean, think we get the point that he's evil? I mean, look at this guy. Then look at Yakumo and look at the way how he looks with his wide face and then actually take a look at Shu again, who literally goes as far as stretching a napkin all over his face and literally looks like he's going ballistic. I mean, literally look at these guys. You think they were showing a little bit too much that these guys were just comically evil? Like, seriously, dude. What the hell is this edgy dumb shit? You don't need to rub in people's face that much just to show how someone is just some evil douchebag. See what I'm saying? It's just another way the show is just way too edgy to be taken seriously as actually being horrifying, and instead looks funny and silly more than anything else. Now here's where we get to truly the deepest issue with Tokyo Ghoul. The biggest problem is that there are just way too many characters in this entire show. I mean, I already showed you like 3 different villains that are all just in the first season alone. And Mr. Motto actually dies in, I think, the 8th episode. That's not even to mention Toka's brother or even Toka herself as a character. Right now, I'm actually going to show you some of the rest of the characters that are actually in the show that I haven't even shown you yet or even talked to you about yet. And just react to it and think about how it would actually really be possible to develop all these characters when your first season is literally only 12 episodes long and you're just expected to give a shit about each and every single one of these characters, and each episode is only 24 minutes long. It's just simply not enough time to actually develop and actually, and that's the thing. All these characters are actually in the first season, and I'm not even joking with you. Like, how are you supposed to even give a shit about these characters? Seriously, dude, how in the ever living shit world are how are you ever in the shit living world are you going to develop this many characters in only 12 episodes? One can argue, since this shit heap has 2 more seasons after this, that it's possible for more time developing each character. But here's the thing. This was already 12 episodes, and nothing was actually coherent enough, and it just threw as much shit as possible into the entire story. So it's really kind of hard to even give a shit. I mean, you need more time to develop each character, and if the first season was only going to be an introduction, then they should have actually done a better job writing a cliffhanger instead of what we eventually get in the final episode. But we'll actually get to that a little bit more later. For the main characters, and instead it just fills itself with its own cock, just messing itself up with side stories all mingled in one piece. I haven't even mentioned or talked about what is actually one of the worst parts of the entire show, the part where Hinami is sad about her mother. It's already cringy enough that she isn't blood related to Toka and calls her sister, but in episode 6, this is where shit really hits the fan. Sadly, this show starts off with a better scene than most of everything else, because I like, how just a slight bit that her mom is a little bit nice to her in this scene, but most of that happens in the shit show, but then literally gets ruined literally at the end of the same episode where Hinami's own mom gets killed trying to protect her daughter. So it's like they just wrote a little cheap emotional moment, and then they just killed her off because it's bullshit. The show wants to write that Hinami and her mom Ryoka have a strong relationship with one another, but the show fails to do that because there isn't enough time developing each character to actually give a shit, so it just feels like weak, emotionally manipulative, dry bullshit. There wasn't actually enough that happened. There wasn't actually much that happened, and while I like a small part of this relationship, well, here's the thing with that. It just feels cheap when something finally just happens a little bit, and then they just kill off a character because the show doesn't want to actually work developing its characters because the show's dog shit. 2 episodes later, it's also revealed that Hinami has the same powers as her mom did, and literally just kicks Mr. Motto's ass after he killed her mom, and the final blow is just given by Toka finishing him off. Now by the end of that, I wonder, what the actual hell was that? It just felt so weak because it was just all crammed in 3 episodes and had nothing really to it. The reason why I harp on this part of the show so much is because of how annoying it is that it's written so cheaply and for no reason. It's just trying to force this bullshit into the show because it has no idea what it's actually doing and doesn't focus on anything. This whole arc with Hinami doesn't even really feel like it has a good place in the show, and rather feels just like filler to really just pad the length of the season out with forced bullshit. There's nothing that really feels coherent with her part of the show, and because this show would rather force several different scenarios into a single convoluted piece of shit story than actually focus building a real main story so everything can feel connected somewhere to present that the show actually makes sense. It just feels disjointed and springs all over the place and writes cheap bullshit things just to lie justify itself what it's doing. Hinami losing her mother was pathetic bullshit and had no real weight to the show because there's not a real overall story piecing this together, but they don't even bother developing Hinami with her mom before her mom actually dies, so you could at least give a shit about their relationship. That's not even mentioning the fact that their powers aren't even explained, so it just adds more to the fact that the world building in the show sucks because we don't actually understand that exists in their own made up artificial bullshit world where all these characters just have powers and you're just supposed to just deal with it. This show is literally pathetic, but we're not even done burning down this terrible piece of shit. Remember how I mentioned that it was strange with Shu in episode 4 that he held a show and just kills his own minion? Well, he's defeated in the very next episode before suddenly reappearing again, somehow towards the end of the first season somehow, which doesn't even make any sense. In this episode, we're shown yet again two other new characters we're given no context about, and the show expects you to give a shit by creating a 5-minute backstory for their relationship, because apparently we didn't have enough characters already yet, because the girl is about to get eaten. You gotta love the fact that this show has the gall to just throw in short backstories for random characters, because that's the only way this show tries to be emotional, because it's a lazy piece of shit. Tokyo defeats this guy by gaining a bullshit power-up where she can just shoot shards out of her wings, and kills not only the bad guy, but then just kills the guy close to the girl, and the episode ends suddenly after. What the hell was that happening? That literally made no sense on any level. Moving on, I also want to mention before we talk about the final episode what a terrible character Toko Kirishima is. Like Ken Kaneki, because the show can never hold still for even a few seconds, she also gets sidelined as a character just for for tons of other characters to just take over the plot and infest as many poorly designed mess stories as possible with nothing to give a shit about each of them. Her backstory about her and her brother Ayato being enemies is just complete garbage, and because we never actually learned a single thing about them together before episode 10, and it's impossible to actually give a shit. It's just another time where they write a lame backstory for a character, and it's the cheapest way for hack writers to get you invested into the shit storyline. Toka often feels rushed as a character and just pulls shit out of her ass whenever the plot needs her to. Her whole character arc feels non-existent, and in one episode, they just cram an entire backstory for her because up until that point, they did nothing for her development, and other times she was just an ass puller who just won fights for the sake of the plot. They also just, rush in that she has feelings for Ken, but nobody could possibly care because too many things in the show feel like they just, run this whole thing down over and it never had a chance of growing to be interesting and emotional. When you look at that right there, you can see the big problem with Toko's character is that the show has no focus on her storyline and feels so rushed and small compared with everything else that happens in the anime. Her arc feels like shit because it's so kicked down it has literally nothing to the whole story. And don't get me wrong, I love emotional stuff. I mean, I'm a huge fan of that kind of thing, but only when it's actually written well. Personally, I think the show would have just even been better if it just stretched everything out far enough and focused on building its world so everything could show what it's about better. But the biggest problem is everything feels so crushed together and it's just so poorly written. This show really should have just been burnt in the fiery depths of Tartarus, so it would have never been made, to be honest with you. Yes, this show has literally a billion problems and other issues that are in the show that in the show isn't even scarier than a puppy because of how bad it is with horror. And in reality, the show is comical and goofy. But the show's biggest flaw is that it makes an irredeemable makes it an irredeemable train wreck is how cluttered the story feels, and it's so convoluted it's ridiculous. I also want to mention that there's a queer character who's just shoved in episode 11, and I want people to know that I have literally no problem with anyone who's gay. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, like, you know, I everybody has the right to do their own thing, but I just want to say that I just think that it's just lame how it's just forced in the show, and it's just kind of cringy and weird. I mean, no offense saying that, but I needed to bring this up only because this show really is just a piece of shit, and that's all I'm trying to say. Don't worry, all right? So now we finally get to the final episode. What an absolute shit show. This scene is so poorly written, it's ridiculous. This is why I honestly think Rize doesn't really feel like a real character. Why and how the hell is she talking to Ken Kaneki as he's trapped in a chair while he's watching two of his literally random friends we couldn't possibly give a shit about getting killed and speaking to him about his strength? She's literally a ghost now talking to him in some alternate universe with white flowers as the background. Who is she to even talk to about this nonsense? And when she herself did nothing but reveal herself to be a ghoul in episode 1 and die right in the first frigging episode. To me, that's partially why I see her conversation as pseudo-intellectual garbage. The other reason is because in reality, it was stronger than Ken didn't choose one of his friends over the other because it would show... It would, in reality, it would have been... It was stronger that Ken didn't choose one of his friends over the other because it would have shown real friendship, but instead she tells him that choosing the girl would have been better. What? Like, what? Other than that, it's strange at all to begin with that she's even talking to him again after she was already dead. Like, how is she talking to him as a ghost? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand, like, how... Like, what's really the purpose behind that? I guess Rize is really a transcendent goddess somehow, but then after her garbage speech about nonsense, she's then dead literally again, and Ken just eats her up somehow when she's literally a ghost now. Like, how does he even eat her when she's already been dead before? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And it's just to give him a power-up. I also want to bring up how jarring it is that Rize mentions that Hide is precious to Ken, when in reality we have no reason to care, mainly because what I said already earlier in the video, there were no scenes building chemistry between Hide and Ken as best friends, so there was nothing between point A and point B to actually give a shit. Hide as a character barely even felt actually a part of the story, so when you think about it, it really just feels so underwhelming and just forced that the show tries to shit on your face, saying that he was really his best friend when in reality, there's nothing to even care about him, so screw this. I also gotta wonder why Toka was also mentioned being a character to worry about in the future when, like Hide, there were barely any scenes at all building a relationship between her and Ken together, so it just feels all like made up nonsense. They even try throwing in things about Ken and his own mother, as if we didn't already have enough freaking characters in this huge convoluted mess to begin with. This scene is extremely bad, mainly because it's all just a Deus Ex Machina asshole where Rize is a plot device now, just for another one of Ken's power-ups. Just bring back the first villain in the show for being a way to come back and beat another different villain. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Not only that, but the scene is also jarring when all of his Ken Kaneki's friends, not to mention actually his mother, who's yet just another character shoved in this entire show, had nothing built with him interacting with them to actually care about all the relationships, but yep, the show is an asshole just expecting you to care anyways, when the series did nothing to deserve caring about all this, because the show is too dog shit to actually develop any of its characters. After that, Ken just comes back and somehow kicks Yakumo's ass, and the show's finally over. So, moving on from the story, some technical aspects I thought were bad in the show were how bad the animation was and how bad the show usually feels static and sometimes even just cuts things, because the show usually looks like it runs out of budget halfway through each episode. A literal example of this is when the guy blows through his fat minion and the show looks like it just clips things right through each other. My favorite animation errors are when blood gushes usually look like grape jelly instead of actual, blood. The soundtrack is also kind of forgettable, and it's not really that good. I don't really actually like the opening music in the show, and other than that, I mean, some of the music I think is all right in the show, and it's probably one of the few only redeeming qualities in this entire show. But I don't think that the show is literally excellent. The music in the show is really excellent. I just think that it's okay. I mean, at some parts, it's mediocre, and at sometimes it's pretty good. And it's literally maybe the only redeeming aspect of the entire show. Wow, dude. What an utter train wreck on a considerable level. I've seen many bad things before, but personally, I would actually argue Tokyo Ghoul is actually one of the worst shows I have ever watched. I literally could not believe a season with only 12 episodes actually has this many problems, literally from start to finish. Time would be better spent hot pressing your dick with a hot forged ring than ever watching this smashed bag of horse cocks ever again. Not only does it fail being a horror anime because of how over the top it is, with how edgy it is, and how hard it is to even take seriously, it becomes when it goes way too far just to show how obnoxiously evil some characters are, and things just being gross for the sake of edge. But it completely fails with storytelling because of how overburdening its cast of characters are, so much that everything just feels crammed and squeezed together, feeling mangled all over the place with nothing coherent. Because the show is too stupid and too shitty to actually focus and develop any of its characters. The show can't just stick with one or two characters at a time and just develop them enough to actually care about them, instead of just forcing as much bullshit as it possibly can and cramming it together into just 12 episodes. That's why my final rating for Tokyo Ghoul Season 1 is a 0 out of 10. I cannot actually believe how pathetic this show actually was. For a while, I actually thought that either Elfen Lied or 11 Eyes would be the worst horror anime ever made. But I've actually thought about this now too. Personally, I would now argue Tokyo Ghoul is really the worst horror anime ever made. I mean, that's literally not saying much for either Elfen Lied or 11 Eyes, because those are both literally awful shows. But Tokyo Ghoul is an abomination. I think it's pathetic and has so many problems, it's ridiculous. If you want a good horror anime to instead to watch, just watch Perfect Blue instead. Perfect Blue is far better in every category, It is a psychological horror about a girl who wanted to become an actress after no longer to be wanting to be a singer. And the film actually has intelligent commentary about freaks who obsess too much over celebrities and why it's necessary to have boundaries with paparazzi when you're too famous. Anyways, let me know what you thought of Tokyo Ghoul. Did you actually like it? Or did you passionately hate it as much as I did and thought it was a complete disaster with incoherent storytelling with bad direction? I always have fun discussing things with other people, and thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more content, and I love my viewers, and I consider all people who watch my content my friends. Thanks for watching. I'm so glad that I'm done watching this piece of shit.